Hi, this is Friar Tim. Welcome to a new series of Friarside Chats. This will be dropping on Friday, September 18th, and this will be the first in a short series on a spirituality of generosity. Why am I picking this? Well, last year the Finance Council, in talking about Newman and our stewardship, noted that in many years there has been very little conversation about the spirituality of money and generosity. They encouraged me to talk about that and offer some reflections on that. So here it is. Over the pandemic in the summer, I worked up a few talks, ran them by the stewardship committee of the strategic planning committee, and they kind of gave me the go-ahead. So this will be the first of a series, 2, 3, perhaps 4, maybe even 5 videos, depending on how we go. Today we're talking about just kind of like some basic principles, and I do have my notes here in front of me. For us as Christians, we obviously have to start with a question of, when it comes to money, what does Jesus say and talk about money? Now, it is quite interesting. Very commonly, when we think about holiness and morality, we immediately focus on sexual issues and sexual identity and sexual behavior. But in reality, Jesus uses wealth and money much more often in his teaching and preaching than really talking about sexuality. So money must be kind of an important issue in here. The first part, kind of a basic principle. The money that we have is not ours. We are, in fact, its stewards. We really believe that everything that we have is all grace, is all gift, is all good. Our time, our talent, and our treasure, all of this is simply a gift to us from God. And what we do with it, how we work with it, where we are with it, is precisely where we're going to be judged. There is, of course, the famous parable of the talents. The talents essentially are money. A talent was a sum of money at that time. Those who invest it, work with it, do good with it, are blessed. Those who hoard it, bury it, keep it covered, keep it underground, so to speak, lose out. We are its stewards. We don't own it. Really, frankly speaking, we don't own anything. As Jesus reminds us, even the hairs of your head are counted from someplace else. Even the sparrow in heaven is counted by our Heavenly Father. All of these things are just simply entrusted to us for our wise stewardship, not our ownership, not our, as my Father Francis would say, not our appropriation, that we do not appropriate things unto ourselves. Secondly, the parable of the rich man who decided to tear down his barns and build bigger barns so that he could store more money and store more goods and store more stuff. It points out that we should really be preparing and using our money not to gain more of it here on earth, but to gain treasure in heaven by generous, wise stewardship here on earth. Again, the whole question is not amassing money. The whole question is not gathering more money. Not a bad thing in and of itself. But if that becomes the sole passion, if that becomes the sole motivator, if that becomes the sole direction of life, and we essentially invest nothing in moving in the opposite direction. Really, in life, if all of our movement in life is this way, consuming and coming into me, and nothing is this way, outgoing, generous, munificent, abundant, sharing, magnanimous. If none of it is going out in that direction, ultimately what we're really doing is turning in on ourselves, closing in on ourselves, wrapping ourselves up in a cocoon, in essence, pulling ourselves into a fetal position which only serves to protect us and does absolutely nothing for anyone else. So again, money is one of these things, like time, relationship, talents. All of these things all fall into the same question of, it's not about me and all of my stuff. It's the question of being generous with other people. Third, and this is pretty much true, probably the greatest competitor that God has for the attachment of our hearts is money. There's a famous legend of my confrere, St. Anthony of Padua, who, in the midst of preaching, noted that a noted money lender's funeral was going on. Anthony stopped his preaching, asked that the chest of the money lender be opened, and instead of finding a heart inside, what they found was a strongbox. And the point of it is rather clear. That which we hold closest to our heart, if it's not our relationship with the God who created us, if it's not our relationship with the God who redeemed us, if it's not our relationship with the God who continues to give us life, if it's not a relationship that is outgoing in terms of relationships with other people, relationships full of pardon, relationships full of mercy, relationships full of wideness, if it's not any of these things, ultimately, it's money. And the power, and the security, and the prestige that comes from it. However, does happiness really come from it? Enough to hear about all of the miserable, extremely wealthy people that are out there, and the real question seems to be, how much is really enough? So the biggest competitor that God has for our hearts might really be the dollar sign. From the other end of it, if we do use money wisely, if we are generous with other people, if we are magnanimous, if we do give to charity, if money becomes a sign of who we are, and this expansive kind of other-centered personality, then of course we're moving in the right direction. And the final point about money that is very clear from Jesus is, do not worry about it. Do not be anxious about it. Cast your bread upon the water and it will come back to you. Give and you will receive. That's the ultimate question. The more we approach life this way instead of this way, the less anxious we'll be, the less closed up we'll be. There are some internal resistances that we have, and it's particularly around this question about anxiety. We get anxious that we're going to run out of money. We get anxious that we don't have enough for right now. And again, sometimes economic situations are frightening. Sometimes economic situations are straitened. But at the same time, we need to ask ourselves, sometimes anxieties are just anxieties. In the same way, we're fearful. We're fearful that if we're generous, people might take advantage of us. We're fearful that if we're generous, people might not be grateful or thankful or respond. We're fearful, perhaps, that people really only like us for our money. Now, all of these fears and anxieties are real. But we need to ask ourselves, while I'm actually feeling fearful and anxious, are all of these things really true? Is it rather that perhaps in my life, internally, I have a certain crustiness that it's difficult to break through? Perhaps I have a certain tightness inside that's difficult to break through. On a personal note, the last couple of weeks I've been undergoing some physical therapy because increasingly my lower back, my gluteus, and my backs of my legs are incredibly tight and I can't unloosen the muscles. So I had to go for some physical therapy to get at the core to loosen it up so that I can do some regular exercises that will actually get to the root of the problem. Generosity does the exact same thing. If internally we are tight, coarse, protected, rigid, generosity serves to loosen us up just a little bit more inside. Financial generosity does this. Pardoning does this. Coming out of ourselves and involving ourselves with other people does this. Serving other people without asking to be served ourselves does some of this. Opening ourselves up honestly in prayer does some of this. So if we find that there's a certain tightness or coarseness or crustiness or protection because we've been hurt or not appreciated in the past, perhaps this is a moment for God to soften us, to move us, and to gently and slowly heal us. Thanks for listening, and be prepared for another Fireside Chat next week. God bless, and stay safe.